Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's event. Today actually is a public lecture and graduation ceremony of the third cohort of the Global Space Policy course. We deliberately made it back to back or part of the ASLI colloquium on the African Outer Space Program. And so some of those who have been participating in the colloquium for the past 2 days, yesterday and day before yesterday, uh, I believe there are some of them who are also here. We are really happy to have you here, and we hope that you're going to have a good experience, not just interacting with the participants, but also interacting with Dr. Dimitrios Stroikos. I'm particularly excited that he's here because, as I was sure when I started talking about ASLI in my opening remark, um, directly or indirectly, he was very instrumental. I'm sure he does not know this, but he was instrumental to the establishment of ASLI, and I'll explain why shortly. So I also want to welcome the participants. It's been normally it should have been 9 weeks of work, but somehow we had to extend to 10 weeks. So I can imagine what it is, combining a course like this with maybe your work or your other academic programs. And it's kind of a rigorous course. We have lectures twice a week, and the lectures are an average of 3 hours per day. So it's quite a lot. And some of them have maybe in-person assignments like simulation or assignments after the class. We also try to assemble kind of like experts from across the world. So some of this you've been seeing information maybe on social media, just to make it as rich as possible. I know it's not been easy, but I'm really happy that you're able to come this far, the endurance and everything. So you're very much welcome. I also want to thank the facilitators that were able to make it. I know some will still join later. I see Dr. Tatiana Viana, whom I think we first met in Rome when I visited the organization, the Italian Latin America association, something like that. And then there's a component for space. So we've been having this discussion, I think about 3 years now. So it's good that we're able to finally have her facilitate the program. And then some other guests, what I call associates of ASLI. I see Alma Palife, my very good friend, the executive director of World Space Week Association. Uh, I'm trying to look out for people, but maybe as we go on, I may just call some people and maybe show some appreciation. I just want, maybe as part of my opening remarks, I just want to say a few things about ASLI or ASLI. It's possible you've heard me say these things before, but there are a couple of people who have not heard about ASLI before. So it'd be nice for them to know who we are, where we are right now, and where we actually want to get to. Um, so I'll just do a very short presentation, just very short one. Where are you now? Let's see. Okay. So, by way of introduction, my name is Etmo Fyong. I'm one of the co-founders of ASLI. My other co-founders are Dr. Valanathan Munsami, who was previously the head of the South African National Space Agency, but currently the deputy CEO of the Saudi Space Agency. He's also the chancellor of the International Space University. My other co-founder unfortunately passed a few months ago, actually on 3rd February 2025. That's Dr. Adigun Adeabiodun. These are my mentors when the idea about ASLI was still fresh, kind of in my mind. Dr. Abiodun, as some of you may know, used to work for the UN. He was the UN expert on space applications. It was a very painful one for me because it was more or less like a father to me. But Uh, well, at some point, we just have to leave the scene. But I think it's good to have had him contribute to making sure that this organization comes to life. Yeah, so this is where Dr. Stroikos comes in, actually. I'll give you a more formal introduction about him later, but some of you may know that he's the editor-in-chief of the Space Policy Journal. So when we were thinking about ASLI, okay, as far back as I think 2017 or so, I was doing my master's with Professor Scott Pace at the George Washington University. He is the director of Space Policy Institute there. So I looked around the US system and I found out that they had a very good system of informed decision making, policy making. I mean, the system, it looks chaotic because there are very many, and it looks as if they are antagonizing one another, but somehow it comes out nicely at the end. And we didn't have any such thing in Africa. So I felt, well, we need to have something like this in Africa. So I spoke with Professor Scott Pace that I wanted to establish a space policy institute in Africa. And the challenge he gave me then was, don't just establish a space policy institute, establish a RAND corporation in Africa. Now, for those of you who don't know RAND Corporation, it's one of the foremost organizations in Africa, in the US. I think established either 1947 or so. RAND Corporation, for me, is, well, was the very first organization to have proposed to the US that the US should launch a satellite to space. That paper is still available online, and that paper was published in 1948. That paper contained not just the technical things around satellite development, but also other socioeconomic benefits of launching a satellite. So even though people say that the former USSR beat US to space by launching the satellite in 1957, October 4, well, those of us who know the geopolitics behind that, and Dr. Stroikos is the expert in this, will know that there was a deliberate strategic decision by the US to have slowed down the process. But that's not for now, but just give you a background. So we had this ALC, no, yeah, it used to be called ALC, African Space Leadership Conference on Space Science and Technology for Development. We had a meeting in Egypt. I think it was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt that year, 2017 or so. And we kind of shared this idea about a Space Policy Institute. And then there was this talk about, let's put it under, I mean, there was already this argument about, no, not argument, but it had been decided that the African Space Agency should be hosted in Egypt. But there was a proposal that the institute should come under the AU and it should be hosted in Egypt and things like that. But we felt that a think tank should be independent, it should be objective, it should be able to present different views, but towards a decision that will be good for all. So that was why we felt, no, let's make it separate from the AU and let it be an independent organization. So in order to kind of formalize the idea, we wrote this paper then and put it out there. So if you look at this paper, I really encourage people to read it. You see that it gives an idea of what we are doing, and you can actually juxtapose it with what you are doing now. You see that somehow it's been a very good guiding light. So Dr. Stroikos, I don't know where you remember. Maybe you must have assigned this to somebody to have reviewed, but that's how this came about. So I'm really grateful to you for have supported this. And I know there are so many other initiatives that have come through, directly or indirectly, through the work of the Space Policy Journal. So we'd like you to continue your work. Let me also chip here that one of the things we intend to do sometime in future is also to put up a journal, but that will concentrate more on, maybe because of rich policy and governance issues within Africa. So maybe we'll have a discussion on that and we'll have some things to learn from you on that. So I just want to say four things about ASLI. I mentioned three 2 days ago, but I'm going to add a fourth one today. ASLI has just one vision, that is to, our focus is not really on the organization, it's on the African space ecosystem. are interested to see an ecosystem that meets the developmental needs and aspirations of Africans and that is globally responsible and relevant. Of course, this is also connected to the issue of governance, which Dr. Stroikos will talk on shortly. This vision closely aligns with the vision of the African Union. Africa's Union's vision is an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in the international arena. Whether that's happening, it's another discussion, but at least we are making progress towards that. 2013, Africa marked the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, and just on Sunday, 25th of May, we celebrated that event again. So in 2013, the African Union asked this question: where will Africa be 50 years from now? So that whole idea of where will Africa be, or where do we want Africa to be, a committee, not just a committee, a series of committees were put together to develop what we call Agenda 2063. Each documents around this are available on the African Union website. So there's a vision, there are the aspirations, all there on the website. Very great idea, and I think the African Union is making deliberate efforts towards achieving this. Are there challenges? Yes. Are there setbacks? Yes. But there's still effort to move forward despite all those things. One of the major things about Agenda 2063 is that there are a couple of flagship projects that were decided upon. And the idea about this was these are continental progress, huge progress projects, which is believed that if we can move forward on this, it will facilitate integration, it will facilitate trade and development. Some of them there has been immense progress in them. For example, the African Continental Free Trade Area is currently active and is working very well. The African passport, well, there was a ceremonial event where heads of state were given the African passport, but not much has happened after that. The Grand Dardan project is still going on. The other one that is a lot of progress has been made is the Single African Air Transport Network. We know the challenges around flying within Africa. Sometimes you need to go to Europe. You want to go to an African country, but you need to fly out to Europe or Qatar or Dubai before you now come back to an African country. That's not very nice, but hopefully SATM will be able to address that. The continental financial institutions there's also progress there, which is a bit slow. That's the African Central Bank, the African Investment Bank, and there are actually three of them. I think the one has to do with, the African Monetary Fund, something like that, yes. But what concerns us majorly is the African Outer Space Program. So I've mentioned the vision of ASLI. The other thing is we have two lenses with which we look at that vision, with which we pursue the vision, and that's the African Space Policy and the African Space Strategy. Also, as a background, I think in 2012, the African Union established the Space Working Group, the African Union Space Working Group. They had some terms of reference, but among that was to develop an African space policy and an African space strategy. I was privileged to be part of that team. Dr. Val Munsami, my co-founder, was the chair of that working group. Actually, that was my very first close interaction with him. And Dr. Abiodun also was part of that working group. So you see that this also kind of connects to that work that we did back then. These documents were adopted by African heads of state in 2016. And so for us at ASLI, argument we usually put forward that this should be the basis of measuring the progress of the African Outer Space Program. Should be the basis of deciding what should be Africa's position on different policy issues, on taking different positions. Even when you're trying to forge partnerships, these two documents should be the guide. So if you look at the two documents, there are two major policy goals as listed there. One is to create a well-coordinated and integrated African space program that is responsive to the social economic, political, and environmental needs of the continent, as well as being globally competitive. So you actually see a sense of where the ASLI vision also comes or is drawn from. And then the other has to do with developing a regulatory framework that supports an African space program and ensures that Africa is a responsible and peaceful user of outer space. So we want to use outer space for good, for socioeconomic development, but without, sustainability, right? Without disturbing others, both the current and future generations from using it. So if you pick those two documents, it highlights the African ecosystem, and this diagram, I love it so much, developed by Dr. Musami, captures the entire ecosystem in just one piece. So what we try to do at the colloquium is to kind of go deeper, take a closer look at each of these elements and see where we are, where we want to be, and how we can go from where we are to where we want to be. So last year, the focus was on human capital. The theme was around capacity building, education around human capital, and that was closely in line with the AU theme for that year. This year, the theme is around industry development and support. I believe we're able to address maybe not all issues around that, but at least some of the issues around industry development and support. And we should put out the report on the colloquium very soon. I've been racking my head on what should be the theme for next year, and what's really on the mind right now is something around, because next year is going to mark the 10th anniversary of the adoption of the African Space Policy and Strategy document. So I'm wondering whether it's time for us to look at those documents as a whole again, 10 years after, to have a review of that document. So that's the consideration for the theme for next year, but we'll still discuss that and see whether that should be it or whether we should look at something else. When we're thinking about the think tank, we looked at the ecosystem, and these are the three major. There were many problems we saw, but by the time we did some clustering, we were able to come up with that these are the three major gaps within the ecosystem. One, within Africa, we have decisions are kind of not, we have a poor decision-making process, so to say, or policy-making process. Some decisions are made maybe due to personal interest or vested interest or due to external influence or something. So we felt it is good to have an informed process, maybe in an organization, maybe in the country, of making policies, of making decisions. The other challenge we have is around our programs. We have several programs, but many are not sustainable. Many, of course, are funded from outside, and the fear really is when those funding stops. I mean, the current geopolitical environment around the world, we see what's happening already. So when funding for space programs stops, what happens to those programs? And then the other thing had to do with Africa's participation in international forums. Of course, this is not news. Sometimes we are not in the room. Sometimes we are in the room, but we are not on the table. Or sometimes we're on the table, but we are not making useful contributions. Knowing fully well that discussions in these rooms, at the end of the day, is going to affect even our own space programs. So those are the gaps. And then the commonality in all of them is that there's kind of very low knowledge about space policy, strategy, law, governance, and even leadership in Africa. So that leads us to number three, three objectives and goals of ASLI. One, to fill those gaps around space policy, strategy, and law, to strengthen our participation in international forums. And I'm going to mention one of the plans we have for late this year. And of course, to see how we can ensure that our programs are impactful and sustainable. So the fourth thing is that we have four domains of interest, which are all connected to outer space. Of course, we started with outer space because that's our, many of us are, that's our background, that's our core or that low-hanging fruit. But we know that you cannot talk about outer space without talking about airspace. And of course, if you attend Kupu's meetings, you always see some of these discussions around where does airspace stop, where does outer space begin. And then in some countries, we see a trend where an organization is governing or regulating both outer space and or yeah, both outer space and airspace, or common aspects. For example, in the US, the Federal Aviation Administration regulates airspace, but also regulates launch and re-entry. The same thing with the UK, with the Civil Aviation Administration. So we see that trend coming up. And I think the same thing with the UAE also. So at some point, we may have a convergence of governance around high altitude platforms, as we call it. Another very critical thing is cyberspace. And just last week, was it last week or this week, the European Space Agency established an office to focus on cybersecurity within their systems. So cybersecurity of space systems is something that is of concern now. Your satellite can be hacked and moved from its slot or its location to another location, and that could be a security threat for a nation. Another important one is nuclear. The people, when they hear nuclear, people kind of shy away from it. But if you're talking space exploration, especially deeper space exploration, obviously you know that we need nuclear energy for propulsion. So those are the four main areas of interest of ASLI, and we are adding it gradually as we go on. I'm trying to see how we can also support other organizations within the ecosystem that actually specialize in each of these areas. So we wear two hats as I round up. One, we function like a think tank and doing the things that a think tank typically does, which is, like bring people together to make contributions, share knowledge, and then make informed advice to policymakers and to the public. So I just listed here some of the activities we've done. Some of us may have participated in some of these activities, and some that we intend to do as we go on. Another one is we also have this heart of being an institute. Right from the onset, it was kind of a deliberate decision that we're going to be involved in educational activities, partly because of the gaps that we saw in the ecosystem. And that's also why we are having this meeting. We are marking the third. We started the Global Space Policy course 2 years ago, so this is third edition. And as we round this up in July, we are having the African Space Policy and Strategy course, which is why the Global Space Policy tries to look around the world. The African Space Policy and Strategy kind of narrows more on Africa. Then on space law and governance, which we also started 2 years ago, but now we have a partnership with McGill University to run the program jointly. That will also come up later this year. And then on space diplomacy, we have this course on maximizing international space cooperation, and a new course which we plan for those who are in management or leadership positions in different space organizations in Africa. That's the effective leadership of space institutions. And the other one for this year is the US space ecosystem. Obviously, we know US is one of the major countries that people want to partner with because of their leadership in space. So we want to understand the ecosystem and because of their influence a lot on the ecosystem. So hopefully that will also happen in August. And we intend to do these courses again next year, but also to add two new courses, the Space Program and Project Management in collaboration with GGPEN, that's the Angola Space Agency, and another course on satellite technology for sustainable development. So we have this bouquet of courses already prepared and some more that we hope to develop as we go on. We do public lectures, webinars, competitions. The Space for Africa competition, which I just ended, I think we're waiting for the outcome from those who are grading it. where we give scholarships to about between 15 and 20 young Africans to participate in the African Space Policy and Strategy course. And then the new one we are starting this year, a quiz competition for high schools. So we'll do a test run this year for high schools in Nigeria before we now extend it to Africa. We also plan to have fellowships. We also have some what you may call special projects like the colloquium, the forums. I think that's July 15 to 17, we have the UK Africa Space Forum, the third edition. So if you'll be attending the UK Space Conference, you're welcome to participate in the Space Forum. Some of us are also aware that there's going to be the Unispace 4 coming up in 2027. I think member states are fully agreed to that. One of the things we want to do is begin to bring African space community together to begin to prepare for Unispace 4. That's really the idea about what for now we've called the Addis Ababa Space Summit. The name could change, but the whole idea is just to bring the space community together so that we can begin to discuss what could be Africa's position when it comes to that forum. That forum is usually an important one, and it usually marks major changes within the entire global space community. And then what we call Agenda 2027. So the initiative is very much connected to what Dr. Zulana has been championing. He's been championing that we should focus a bit more on satellite communications and connectivity, because if we can really get that right, we'll be able to make a lot of progress when it comes to socioeconomic development. So if you get it right, you give internet access to a lot more people, you facilitate education, learning, you facilitate communication, you facilitate commerce and trade. So our proposal, which we want to push forward to the African Union, is for African Union to make the year 2027. So what really happens is that every year the African Union has a theme, and that theme is usually led by a department of the African Union Commission. So we are proposing that 2027 should be focused on satellite communications and connectivity because of the impact it's going to make within the Africa. So that's what we call Agenda 2027. These are other projects we are working on: Space Policy Tracker, Space Skills Survey. Because of time, I don't want to go too much in trying to describe them. And of course, we are planning to apply to the African Union and CUPUS to be observers in this organization so that we can actually make some more input. So I think that's basically it about ASLI, and I'm happy to engage with us, and both here and outside here, and to explore which areas we can collaborate. I really want to thank many people who have been supporting us and who have been working together with. I mentioned Alma. Last year we did some activities together in Addis. The other thing we champion, I know some people may not be happy about that, is because of Addis Ababa's strategic position in the continent. So we usually try to promote Addis Ababa as the space diplomacy capital for Africa. That looks as if we are neglecting other countries. It's not. It's just that Addis Ababa hosts some organizations, the headquarters of organizations in Addis. So it's easier to converge in Addis Ababa than in many other places. So it's not, we are not biased actually. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know. I think I'm not sure there's any question for me. I don't expect any question, but if there's any question, I'm happy to quickly respond. Otherwise, I'll just present the participants. So in the past, what we usually do was to call on the participants, play their anthems, and have some fun around that, but that would take a lot of time. So what I'll just do is just to call the countries, the participants. If you're okay with putting on your camera for us to see your face, that's fine. But if not, well, if you can, that'll be fine, so that we just kind of see your face. This year we had 18 participants from how many countries? 7 countries. And this year's one was kind of very impressive because we had a couple of participants from even outside Africa. So that was kind of impressive. So I just called the names, starting with Cape Verde and the Anjos. If yeah, I see Andy's here, and the Anjos from Cape Verde. And then from Ghana, we have 2 participants, Yao Bonsu and then Naomi Frimpong. Thank you, Naomi. I know it's quite late for you in Japan right now, but thank you for joining. Then from France, we have 3 participants. There is Fanny Ayat. Fanny Ayat, then Ato Limoge, and Shadi Rochard. Then from Germany, we have Ato Hila from Germany. I was informed that in Germany there's a public holiday today, so I don't know whether I should be able to join today. Yeah, Shadi, thanks for joining. Good to see you. Then from Kenya, we have 3 participants from Kenya. Emmanuel Kilu, Emmanuel Kilu, John Mark Ocheng, and Alexander Opicho. And just to comment on Emmanuel Kilu and John Mark. So Emmanuel and John Mark, they participated in the African Space Policy and Strategy course last year, uh, which is okay. Even before then, they participated in the Space for Africa competition. So they were 2 of the winners of that competition. And in participating in the African Space Policy and Strategy course, they were 2 of the best participants that year. So for that course, we usually give an award that if the best participants get scholarship to attend the Global Space Policy course. So that's Emmanuel John Mark Ocheng and Emmanuel Kilu. And then from Nigeria, we have 2 participants, Husenat Eti Balogun. I had a chat with her this morning. I don't know that she'll be able to join. Um, she's doing some work in a clean room, so I don't know whether she can join. And then Paul Oladuni. Oh, Usenat, I think I see you. Okay. Yeah, Paul, nice. And then from South Africa, we have 6 participants. Kopano Moyesano, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name well. Mahin Pablo, Sibyl, the surname is a bit difficult for me to pronounce, but Sibi. Then Malisela Satege, uh, Janusha Singh, and Katarina Wheat. Yes, I don't think I left out anybody. Yeah, so that's it. So I want to thank all the participants for enduring. Hello, James. Thanks for
You
joining.
left Morocco.
Yeah. Oh, okay. No, I was calling the participants for the course. Yeah, but it's nice to have you. Thanks. So thank you all the participants for the labor for going through the entire process. I know some of us have not finished our assignments yet, so we still have up to I think the first week of June if to finish all the assignments so that they could still be assessed by the facilitators before you can get your certificate, you know. All right, thanks. So I think at this point we can now go to the main purpose of our gathering, which is the lecture. Hello?
Yes, as requesting, maybe before we get to the public lecture, can we just have a screenshot of the participants?
Oh, okay, that's fine. Maybe we can do the screenshot now. That's fine. So can we put on our cameras? Thanks, Safira, so that we take a screenshot. some faces I've not seen in a long time. I've not seen Andy's face. Good to see you, Andy. Okay, are we ready? Hello, Safira. Have you taken the snapshots for the screen?
Yes, I am. I see some people joining now, but I am. So.
Let us know when you're ready. Just give us maybe through a count so that we are also ready too.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. I'm now ready, so you can please smile. Okay. Done. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Tim.
All right. So let me formally introduce Dr. Stroikos. Yeah. So Dr. Dimitrios Stroikos is the head of the Space Policy Project at LSE IDS. LSE IDS is a think tank within the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Stroikos also teaches at the Department of International Relations at LSE. He also serves as the editor of Space Policy. So it's called Space Policy and International Journal, but I just call it Space Policy Journal. His research has appeared in such publications as Astropolitics, India Review, International Politics, Journal of Contemporary China, Review of International Studies, and Space Policy. He has also co-edited the book Rising Power, Limited Influence, The Politics of Chinese Investment in Europe, and the Liberal International Order. Stroikos holds a PhD in International Relations from LSE. I think that's a very abridged version of Dr. Stroikos. So, I mean, there are some more things if you want us to know about him. Without much further ado, Dr. Stroikos, it's over to you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ofjong, for the invitation. Can you all hear me well? Great. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today to deliver the lecture. Well, first of all, congratulations on all the graduates, and also congratulations on the important work that you're doing. It's very impressive, and I hope the momentum continues. So I decided to talk today about governing outer space in a multiplex global order. As you might know, my background is in international relations, and I wasn't quite happy with the narrative and the focus when it comes to global governance. I was keen, this is, by the way, builds on a paper now under review, so I'm really keen to hear your feedback and what you think about that. It's part of a project about multiplexity, and I'll say in a few minutes what that is. But I wasn't happy with the narrative. Obviously, there's so many challenges to global space governance, with which you are familiar with. A lot of focus on the militarization and weaponization of space, very important dimensions. Clearly, the US-China rivalry in space, then the institutional deadlock on space arms control. At the same time, we're also seeing the commercialization and privatization of space, then space sustainability, the role of space debris, of course, and efforts to promote the sustainable use of space. Related to that is the issue of space situational awareness and the need for space traffic management, and so many things. And at the same time, of course, we've also seen how recent developments, such as the role of satellite images of Russian troops in Ukraine and the use of Starlink terminals in Ukraine, have contributed to further blurring the distinction between what is private and what is public in space, between what is military and what is civilian uses in space. And of course, all of these serve to highlight again the complexities involved in governing space as an emerging field. And I'm sure you're very much familiar with these issues. So the topic is very important. I would be the last to say that the global governance of space is not important. Actually, space is increasingly central and very much embedded in our daily lives. It's very important not only for security, but also for socioeconomic development. And as more countries, as more actors are entering into the space domain, we are seeing more diversity and more plurality of interests, perspectives. I think this is already a reality. And this is where I don't feel happy with what remains a very Eurocentric narrative about what's going on in space. Even the literature on the international politics of space and global space governance, I believe, remains very Eurocentric. On the one hand, we hear a lot about what happens in the US, what happens in Europe, and less about what happens in other places of the world. So that's one of the key themes I will try to highlight today in the context of multiplexity. But also the other thing, of course, here is that there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of attention about all the gloomy aspects of space, again, the weaponization and militarization of space, space debris, and so on. But I think this narrative, in some ways, attracts attention or glosses over, if you like, the degree of cooperation. There's so many interesting initiatives that take place. And those are cooperative, those are about socioeconomic development, including, of course, the many developments that are happening in Africa, as Dr. Ofyong mentioned. And of course, your institute is part of these dynamics that I want to highlight today. So actually, I'm more interested in this context through this idea of multiplexity to highlight also the agency of what we call, I'm not quite happy with the term, but it's there anyways, of the global south. Or if you like, the non-Western world. I think it's very important to do that. So what is multiplexity first? Multiplexity is an idea that has been put forward. It's a concept, it's not a theory itself, that was first introduced by Professor Amitav Acharya, who is a prominent expert in international relations, in his book, The End of American World Order. Now, the very word multiplexity draws from a multiplex cinema. Think of a multiplex cinema. Instead of one movie for everyone, there are many films showing at once. Now, in the global order, it's a metaphor, right? In the global order, then, this represents multiple visions of world order. Liberalism, authoritarian capitalism, regionalism, and so on. So, unlike the Cold War or unipolar moment, there's no single dominant ideological storyline. Second, it is about plural audiences. There are different actors and different preferences. Again, in a multiplex cinema, people choose the film that resonates with them. Likewise, states and global actors choose which norms and institutions to engage with based on their own interests, cultures, and priorities. There's no assumption then that everyone must or should follow the same path. The third aspect here is that there's no central director. Power here is diffused, it's not commanded or centralized. In this multiplex global order then, there's no one single director running all the screens. Global governance is no longer orchestrated by one single power. Authority is more shared, negotiated, and sometimes contested among diverse players, regional powers, international organizations, private actors, think tanks, such as your institute, and so on. And the fourth aspect is that of coexistence, not convergence. these films, going back again to this metaphor, run at the same time, sometimes interacting, sometimes contradicting. And I think this helps to capture a world where different orders coexist, with Western liberal norms, Chinese-led initiatives, Global South coalitions, and so on. It's not about everyone eventually merging into one system, but about managing difference in a complex and increasingly pluralistic order. So that's the idea of multiplexity deriving from this metaphor of the multiplex cinema. So I hope you can find that already interesting here. So Amitav Acharya challenges the idea of a singular Western-led international system. Instead, he introduces the concept of a multiplex world order, a more pluralist and decentralized global system in which multiple actors, ideas, and institutions shape international affairs. At the core of his argument, then, is the claim that the post-Cold War liberal international order, dominated by the United States, is giving way to a new order marked by diversity and diffusion of power and authority. Now, what are the key features of this multiplex world order? The world is no longer unipolar. We already see emerging powers such as China, India, Brazil, South Africa, asserting influence alongside traditional Western actors. So no single state or bloc dominates the international society. Then we're seeing a diversity of ideas. Global governance is shaped by multiple normative frameworks, not just liberal internationalism. There are, as I mentioned before, alternative visions, including sovereignty-centered regionalism and development-oriented models, which are gaining traction. So we're seeing a more decentralized and layered governance. Authorities disperse across states, regional platforms and mechanisms, private actors, and informal networks, of which, again, the Institute is part of it. So governance emerges more overlapping and interacting institutions rather than from top-down universal regimes. So there is also then norm contestation here. Norms are no longer uncontested or universally accepted. Actors from the global south are increasingly assertive in shaping, resisting, or redefining global norms. So we might see an order without hegemony, if you like. A multiplex order suggests that global governance can function without a single very powerful state. Cooperation is negotiated among diverse actors rather than enforced by a dominant power. And then another key aspect here is the role of regionalism and informal institutions, again to highlight that. So what are the implications according to Professor Acharya? The multiplex world order is more representative and potentially more legitimate, but also perhaps less coordinated and more complex. It moves beyond the binaries of Cold War and unipolar models, acknowledging the realities of power diffusion and normative pluralism. It challenges assumptions that global order requires US or Western leadership, instead highlighting adaptive cooperation across a fragmented but interconnected system. And in his word, according to Professor Acharya, in a multiplex world order, the governance of global affairs is no longer the preserve of a Western-led hegemon, but the outcome of pluralistic interactions among diverse actors, ideas, and institutions. So this is, broadly speaking, the idea here. And the idea of this project and this paper is to bring that then into space. So the problem here, of course, is that when it comes to international relations and space, international and the global governance of space, international relations concepts are usually underutilized. And as I said at the beginning, the main narrative here is mainly about geopolitics, about realism, about strategic competition, especially between US and China. and it's about the militarization and weaponization of space. But as I said, this prevailing narrative glosses over what is happening in the world. And I think that's a pity. And we need more sophisticated concepts that captures, as I said before, this more pluralistic and decentralized space order emerging. So what you can do, and what I'm doing in this paper as part of this project, and in order to highlight the agency and different perspectives of non-Western space actors, I particularly take a look at the role of emerging space actors. I'll say a few things here about China. The other way you can do with that is to highlight non-state actors, and which also involves, of course, startups and companies now in Asia, in Africa, getting involved in space. So it's not only about the main commercial big space actors we know, such as Elon Musk's Starlink. And the third one is to highlight the importance of space regionalism. For many years, we have been, when we would talk about regionalism, the first thing that will come to our mind would be the European Space Agency. And again, I think this is very Eurocentric in the sense that now we're seeing regional organizations and mechanisms emerging, of course, in Africa, as you are very familiar with, in Asia, in Latin America. So again, multiplexity serves to highlight some aspects that tend to be neglected in mainstream narratives about space and what's going on in space in terms of politics and international relations. So in terms of emerging space powers, of course, it doesn't make sense to talk about China as a rising power. China has already can be seen as a recent space power with an impressive record of achievements. So I won't bother you with these details. But what is very interesting, and sometimes we don't pay much attention, is to how China is also trying to provide some public goods and assume a leadership role. And this involves, of course, incorporating space into the Belt and Road Initiative, but also through leadership projects such as the United Nations China Cooperation on the Utilization of the China Space Station, which is especially oriented towards the participation of countries from the Global South. Then there is also the International Lunar Research Station, of course, a joint project with Russia. China is also talking about becoming a science power in the next few years, but we are seeing, very interestingly, its engagement with the Global South through space. And I think this is also something that has been neglected, and it can serve to highlight the utility of the multiplexity concept. I'm sure you're very familiar with the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, where there is a very strong space component. The China CELAC Forum with Latin American, Caribbean states also very recently has incorporated a space component. Then there is also a strong space component within the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum. And so we're seeing China using specific regional diplomacy now that involves a very strong space component. And then, of course, there is space cooperation within the bloc of BRICS. This doesn't mean, of course, that China is a great space power or that it's going to replace the United States anytime soon. The US is still the #1 power. We have to take into consideration that space power is not only about material capabilities, it's also about your social power. That is, how many followers you have. Has your leadership been accepted by other countries, by other players? And if you just compare, for example, the number of participants in the US-led Artemis Accords with the ILRS, then you have a very good idea that the US, it's still the world's leading space power. And the key question is whether China can translate its material sources of space power into actual influence. But nevertheless, this is not to say that there hasn't been a diffusion of power, of perspectives, and China has played an important role in that, especially in the context of its cooperation with the Global South. Then another key dimension here is the role of, well, obviously other emerging space powers. India here is very important. I won't say many things here. Also Brazil, UNE, for example, that assert regional and global roles. But part of this multiplexity lens is also to highlight Southern multilateralism, which refers to cooperation and institution building among countries of the Global South that are initiated, led, or significantly shaped by those countries rather than by traditional Western powers or multilateral institutions dominated by them. And again, the BRIC satellite constellation is a key example here as a symbol of Southern space cooperation, but I'm confident that we're going to see other examples emerging as well. For example, Dr. Ofyong mentioned cooperations through Addis Ababa, so maybe there is something into there already. Now we're also seeing, of course, the role of commercial actors, and this is a consequence, of course, of many gaps in the current architecture of global space governance, and this has allowed non-state actors, especially commercial actors, to assume a role in shaping rules and norms. We're seeing that especially in the context of safety and interoperability standards. Some good industry examples and initiatives here are the Consortium of Execution of Rendezvous and Servicing Operations and Space Safety Coalitions. And again, those examples here, if you look at the role of non-state actors, helps to highlight how global space order is already a more pluralist and decentered global domain of activities. So that captures that nicely as well. But of course, there are many issues. For example, how can we hold accountable commercial actors? There are issues of legitimacy, accountability, and also normative inclusivity. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're also seeing, partly because of the growing participation of commercial and private actors, the further blurring of the distinction of what is private and what is public. And then the third dimension from a multiplexity, through the multiplexity lens, is regionalism beyond Europe. And of course, you're very familiar with what happens in Africa, so I won't bother you with that. But what I can highlight here is that, and that's my understanding, that the European Space Agency used to be the standard, if you like, universal model, but this is changing. We are seeing how many African stakeholders now tailor regional initiatives and cooperations toward their own needs. And I think here in Europe, this is a wake-up call, because they have missed how many things are happening outside Europe, and that Europe doesn't serve as this idea of a universal model when it comes to regional cooperation. Many African stakeholders and decision makers withdraw experiences from other regions outside Europe, and I think that's very important. And of course, it's not surprising. But again, the multiplexity framework captures this dynamic. I believe it's very important in challenging Eurocentric and universalist understandings of what is happening in space. Of course, beyond Africa, There are many other cases, more recent ones, such as the Latin American and Caribbean Space Agency, for example. You can also add here India South Asia satellite. And I forgot to mention the Arab Space Cooperation Group, of course, which is also a very interesting regional mechanism. So what multiplexity reveals? Governance today is very fragmented. We all know that, and you do know that. But it's also pluralistic. It's not unipolar, bipolar, or fully polycentric. It is multiplex. Multiplexity then serves to highlight diversity in norms, actors, and institutions, and of course this is a consequence of different interests as well. It challenges also hegemonic or universalist narratives of governance, as I was just highlighting. And in doing so, it is very important to re-emphasize that non-Western actors are not just recipients, they shape rules too, they shape norms too. So in doing so, multiplexity helps to integrate neglected actors, histories, and forms of agency, and in that context, the agency of non-Western space actors. So my last concluding reflections here, multiplexity underscores the need for plural, inclusive frameworks. Space governance increasingly shaped by contestation, hybridity, and adaptation. A future order in space will depend on the practices of diverse actors, including the Global South. Also, multiplexity as a conceptual lens helps to highlight the need for analytical openness to navigate, to better understand this evolving landscape. And it goes without saying that Africa and the Global South have a stake and already a voice in shaping the future of space. So on that note, I will leave it here. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Stroikos. Yes, so it's been an interesting lecture. I know some of the concepts may be relatively new for those who are maybe don't have IR background, but I think okay, I think it's been an inspiring lecture in the sense that it gives us some things to think about. And maybe we do have some time for engagement to interact a bit more about the concept. So I already see a hand up. Nelly? Nelly is an expert in political science and IR. So
Ah, you think very highly of me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Strakos. Very interesting lecture. I've learned a lot. So I just have a quick question with regards to this concept in multiplexity. I don't know if I'm pronouncing in terms of like if it applies to every technical or sectorial area in space. For example, if we look at the moon and the regime, the legal regime around the moon, we see that we have the Artemisa course, which you mentioned, and the ILRS. So it's looking very bipolar. So my question is, would you say it may apply for some aspects of space, maybe downstream, or certain aspects of upstream, and would not apply to others? Second question is, there is this great phenomena we see in Africa where some African countries are signing the Artemis Accords, while others are signing the ILRS. And there is a lot of incentive, of course, to signing these agreements. But I'm very worried about how this may cause strengthening the bipolar division rather than contributing to multilateralism for the lunar regime. But that's just my opinion. I wanted to see from your professional point of view what is more practical for states to do. Thank you.
Great questions.
do you want to respond to that, or you want some more?
I'm happy to try. I mean, thank you, Nelly, very much. Those are great questions. I start with the Artemis Accord. So, yes, multiplexity does not, how can I say, neglect, or I'm not trying through multiplexity to say that power politics do not matter, or they're not, asymmetries of power or inequalities are not there. It's more and actually this is, I think, very relevant in the context of what happens now with the exploitation of lunar resources and what we're seeing, right? So from a multiplexity lens, what you want to do is you make a normative argument that actually, if those efforts are not inclusive enough, and if they don't take into consideration the concerns of the global south, and if they are to perpetuate global inequalities, this is not going to work. So you can use it as a vehicle to criticize what is already happening, right? So that's a way to think about that, because as Nelly, you're very right. When it comes to what is happening on the moon now, and you have all this debate about this lunar space, as I'm seeing that, for many years, we have, if you like, with Sputnik and so on, we had the gradual extension of international society to orbital space as an extension of international society. We have space law, we have space diplomacy. We had the framework to manage competition and cooperation in space, right? Now what I'm saying with this lunar space is that there is all this hype, there are all these efforts to already treat that as a new area, a new part of space that is ready to be exploited, but we don't have the mechanisms and the tools to do that. There was maybe that's a bit too generic for you, but there was a sort of a closure, if you like, of the international system through law, diplomacy, and all the mechanisms we have on Earth to manage that. But now I'm seeing, opening Pandora's box, because there's not a framework of managing competition, but also cooperation when it comes to this lunar space. And I'm very much concerned that if things are as they are now, we're going to perpetuate global inequalities. So what you can do from this multiplexity point of view is to highlight again, complexity, different actors, different interests, but also to make the normative case that this shouldn't be the case here, that we need the global south to also have a more powerful stake. So I don't know if I have answered that first question about the Artemis. Again, I don't think that this is something necessarily bad for African states to join the Artemis. Of course, it's a very interesting project, and again, it serves to highlight the multiple actors, sources of authority in space governance. I don't think that this is a zero-sum game. Oh, if you have joined the Artemis Accords, then somehow you downplay and you undermine space regionalism in Africa. Far from it. I think we can see different initiatives, different efforts coexisting. So I hope I have answered this question.
Okay, I think so. Yeah, I think she says yes. There's some questions in the chat box, but before I bring them up, I want us to go a bit elementary, Dr. Stroikos, and what I mean is elementary for those who have IR background. So generally, it's assumed that, no, not say assumed, there are three schools of IR: realism, liberalism, and constructivism. I just wanted to, just for the sake of those who don't have that background, to maybe give an overview of this and how, and then the particular question I want to bring is multiplexity. We do call that an aspect of constructivism. That's actually my question here.
Yeah, you're very right. The issue here is that, yes, there are three main approaches. Obviously now we are having, if you like, a new generation of scholars that they've also built on post-colonialism, on feminism and gender studies. I think the study of international relations and outer space is also diversing. But the main issue here is that we're still stuck with a realism and a very particular version of realism, not the classical realism, which is attentive to the role of leadership, the responsibility of leaders, and prudent leadership, and the balance of power, but a very particular structural realist version, that it's very state-centric, and it doesn't have in this regard much to say about global governance. Then we have liberalism, which can tell a lot about regimes and cooperation, but it misses the diffusion of power, it dismisses the role of the global South and the agency of the non-Western world. So I think this is where Amitav Acharya comes in, who is actually a prominent constructivist. So he builds on that. But it's not a theory. It's more like a concept, a mental map, if you like. That's what concepts do. Think about how many different maps you have on the tube, on the metro. If you go to London, one to show you where the stations are, one to show you where the railways are. So I guess it's a framework that tries to capture dimensions and dynamics that are missed from the prevailing narrative, that it's very much embedded into this realist and very Eurocentric idea about global space governance. And that's again why it has this normative strong component, that, you know what, we have to move beyond Eurocentrism, because actually, you know what, it doesn't capture all the complexity, all the initiatives, the agency, the actors in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, of course. And I can tell you, based on my own experience with talking with people here in Europe, they have missed a lot of this. You know, they still think like the world was 30 years ago. You talk about India as a rising power, not to mention about China as a recent power. Or you mention all the actors involved, all the initiatives, because the African Space Agency is also not the only one. It's the major mechanism or platform, but there's so many others now emerging. The Leadership Institute, your institute, can be seen part of this effort to, again, to capture a more complex reality with a more diffused sources of authority, efforts to govern, to educate. So yes, it tries to challenge these three mainstream approaches, if you like, but it has also this conceptual lens to, you know what, we have to shift our focus from this prevailing narrative that it's all about competition, it's about the European and Western space powers, and to shift our attention to all this cooperation that happens. I'm not saying that there are not problems, and you highlighted them, of course, in your introduction, Dr. Ofjung, but that if you focus on that, you miss another story there. So I hope this makes things a bit more clear about what I'm trying to do with this paper.
Yeah. One of the comments you also made was the application of IR theories or screws in space. It's not, we don't have much of it. So I definitely see more of that. I think one of the very few papers I've seen around that is the one by Professor Scott Pace, also in the Space Policy Journal. It's titled U.S. Space Policy and Theories of International Relations, the Case for Analytical Eclecticism. I'm not sure I'm permitted to share it. I have the paper, but I don't know whether they are. But maybe if we can go online and see if you can get it. So let me just bring up some questions in the chat box. There's a question from a man. Could you please elaborate? You talked about space power and emerging space power countries. So could you elaborate on that? What do you mean by space power, or well, I think great space power, I don't know, but space power and emerging space power countries from the global south. I know you mentioned great space power, and I think there's another concept called emerging space power. So maybe you want to elaborate on that and see how it applies to global south.
Yeah, I guess my main point here, and that's another part of a project I'm involved in, when we talk about space power, it has been usually associated with a strategic or military connotation. So you have that discussion there, those debates there about how space power contributes to military national power, right? And then you have discussions about what to be a great space power entails. And where I come into this discussion is that rather than focusing only on the material capabilities of space power, because the debate is framed along these lines, how many satellites you're launching, how many rockets you have, then you're either a space power or somewhere in the middle or so on. I'm arguing here that space power is not only material, it's also social, in the sense that if you want to be seen, accepted as a great space power, it's not what you think about yourself. You have to be accepted and treated as such by the community, the space community of states. And that's why I said China has been trying to do that, portraying itself as a responsible space power. But when you compare it to the US, obviously now things are a bit complex. But if you take a look at the US, it has a wide network of allies, of followers. The initiatives are there. There is a lot of fellowship there. So it has more social power, not only material sources of space power capabilities. And this goes back to the idea that within the international space community, states, especially great powers, also have great power responsibilities to make the system work. So that builds again from a very particular IR framework that I don't want to bother you here. But the key takeaway here is that if you want to be a great space power, it's not only about your material capabilities, but also about whether other states and other actors believe in your fellowship. More closely to this idea of soft power, if you like, but I prefer this sociability dimension there. Again, I won't bother you with that. That I built on that in a book that hopefully will come out soon. So I hope I answered this question.
If I may ask a related question, during your presentation, you mentioned China as a great space power, but you also refer to them as a partial space power. Do you
Yeah.
want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's this idea that China has been trying hard to be perceived as a great space power. This involves providing public goods. That's what traditionally great powers do. We're seeing that through the space station, which is open for the participation of other countries. As I mentioned in my presentation, you are also seeing China now using specific regional forums of diplomacy to promote its space technology and space cooperation with the global south. But at the same time, if you compare it, I guess this idea was with the US, there is not this level of fellowship. I guess this is more a criticism of this idea that China is going to take over or replace the US very, soon, which is a hype and a narrative there. So this is what makes it a partial space power. It doesn't have the same level of fellows or fellowship, if you like, than the United States. So it is a great space power on many accounts, but it also remains sort of partial in this regard. So there is a contradiction there, because you cannot attract many followers yet, like the US. So it takes you more than these initiatives, and it takes you more than launching too many satellites or having many rockets. Again, it builds to this idea of power as social. So I don't know if that makes things a bit more clear. Especially in Europe, there has been a pushback, for example, against China, during 2020 and the pandemic and afterwards. So there are many critical voices in Europe and many European leaders that are very careful not now to cooperate with China. Africa, of course, it varies, right? It's a case by case, but I don't want to get into the many politics of that. But again, to highlight here this concept, if you like, of space power, not only as material, but also as social.
Okay, let me bring a different dimension. There's a question again from Amma, and this question is, how can we control or regulate the militarization and weaponization of outer space without binding global space law or regime? Is that feasible, or how do we go about that?
Well, that's a great question, and if we had, if we had the responses, that would be great. I believe that space law is very important, and rules and norms and principles, but you can also manage a level of stability if you have a sort of a framework for managing competition between great space powers. And let me explain, and I've published of that, the idea of great power management in space. We have seen during the Cold War the Americans and the Soviets creating a framework. It was bilateral, it was informal, to manage competition. There were channels of communications. Some red lines were drawn. And that was amid the Cold War, with proxy wars, with a very strong ideological rivalry as well, right? But nevertheless, the Americans and the Soviets, even at the height of the Cold War, they found a way to talk to each other. It wasn't very straightforward, it wasn't an easy process. But because space was also very much implicated with nuclear weapons, they found a way, as what James Clay Maltz in his book, The Politics of Space Security, highlights, strategic restraint. So they learned gradually that it makes more sense to treat space as a collective good than treat space as another theater of warfare. And they managed to do that. Again, that was not a straightforward or a very smooth process. But after they established this informal cooperation or communication and a framework not to weaponize space, this also opened the way to arms control treaties and so on. So my concern right now with the weaponization of space is that the nuclear space nexus is still there, although we don't talk much about it. It's further complicated by the involvement of the commercialization and privatization of space, in the sense that you might have private actors now part of the nuclear deterrence architecture, and you might have one country thinking that they're shutting down a satellite that is commercial, or they mess up with a satellite that is commercial, but actually that belongs part of the nuclear architecture of a second country. And then this means that this can lead very easily into escalating conflict on Earth, with nuclear weapons implicated. That's what keeps me awake at night. And you have the two most important space powers, China and the US, not talking to each other. I mean, this is very much recognized by policy analysts, by leaders, this idea that you have to establish a framework for managing competition. And if that happened during the Cold War between the Soviets and the Americans, the question is why it's not happening now? And that's an open question. I also have a student of mine at the LSE working on that now. It is a big question, but the key point here is that you also have, there is more than ever the need for global space powers to acknowledge the importance of coexisting together. And that's the tragedy, if you like, of what we're seeing right now, what we're witnessing right now, that the problems, collective space problems, are only emerging and multiplying, like such as space debris. And at the same time, great space powers do not talk to each other to address some of these issues that are in their common interest to do so. And obviously the broader geopolitical climate is not helpful. Uh, I believe that yes, we see that non-state actors, as I mentioned before, when it comes to space sustainability and safety operations, they've already jumping in to fill some gaps there. But that's only because great space powers have not assumed the great power responsibility. So in some ways, now they behave as great space irresponsibles, right? Some steps have been taken. There were periods when, for example, by the mid 2010s, the Americans and the Chinese, they have agreed on the importance of space debris and work on space debris. But I think this is changing. I think that we will see more effort between the great space powers also to acknowledge the importance of coexisting and to tackling some collective problems. Now, if this sort of framework then exists at the informal level, then of course then it can be crystallized or morphed into more formal norms, principles, and rules. But I think the key again here is that great space powers should first try to find a way to talk to each other and to agree on some common denominator here about how to address some common challenges.
You want to introduce, there's this concept of tracks of diplomacy. So there's a first track of diplomacy where those who are primarily
Mhm.
involved in policy making or diplomatic efforts engage. But there's also the second track where
Yep.
people who are not maybe at that governmental level, but maybe commercial companies, organizations, and many people I see on the call right now are engaged in maybe companies or organizations, and I believe kind of could play a role or have roles to
Mhm.
play when it comes to. I just wanted to maybe speak on that. What kind of role the maybe the importance and how the second track of diplomacy could help in space governance and making, I mean, promoting peace, let me put it that way, within the
Yeah,
space.
yeah. I think, yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you very much, Dr. Ofyong, for mentioning that. I think it's very important on different levels. We're seeing already track to diplomacy being very important on different fronts. We're seeing the participation of NGOs, of generally non-state actors being more active in space sustainability efforts, as I also mentioned before. Part of this, of course, is track to forums, and it's about exchanging ideas, keeping channels of communications open. It would be interesting to see more track to diplomacy, although maybe there is already happening between Americans and Chinese, for example, and tackling some, global challenges. I expect also to see more track to forums with India and with other Asian space powers. So I think diplomacy generally is a good thing. We need more diplomacy in this world we live in today, not less. And I think in a multiplex world that actually captures also the role of non-state actors, you definitely need more. It starts with exchanging ideas, then building trust, um, identifying common and shared interests, and then you move on further to crystallize these processes of cooperation into more formal ones. So track to diplomacy always has been playing a role. Think about the role also of scientists and engineers during the Cold War. So there is, I think, already happening more, and there is scope for more in this regard.
Natasha, will you like to speak? I see you put up a question, but if you want to speak, I hope she's still here. Natasha?
See, there I can see the question. Okay, so Natasha is also has a very, very interesting question. I haven't thought about that quite well because of my research on China and India mainly. But I think this is already happening. I think, so the question is, how would you see African companies, micro and MMAs, contributing to or influencing these multilateral space governance conversations to protect their interests and promote equitable access to space resources? Well, one very practical way to see that, and I can see why it can be very difficult to do so, is when you have one voice in multilateral fora. And I think, Dr. Often you mentioned that that's not always the case in your introduction, if I got it correct. But one of the main interesting things about regional cooperation is that you reach a consensus of one voice, and then you can also share your concerns, share your views in multilateral fora. So I guess that's one way to do that. We've already covered track to diplomacy. Another way to think about that is, and that's part of the ASLI and your mission, to educate also decision makers, diplomats, and a new generation of stakeholders about what is at stake here. So they can be more vocal also in their own disciplines and in their own work. So I guess it's a multi-level approach to which you can help African stakeholders to voice their concerns and to make them more influential, if you like. I think Africa and African stakeholders are already part of this debate in the context of multiplexity. The challenge, of course, is how to make that voice even stronger. And I think there is scope for that. And I think this is also part of your institute and the impressive work you're doing there. So it's multi-level, I think, but it's already happening. I would try to be more optimistic here along the lines of the optimism of the multiplexity approach.
Nelly, I see a question you put on the chat box. Is it related to your earlier question or it's
Oh no, I just quickly wanted to understand. I think I asked it after you asked if it was under constructivism in terms of multiplexity, if it draws like insights from different IR theories to come up with its like conception framework. That's why I asked if it was like an eclectic approach. It's just
Oh yeah.
random
Yeah.
question.
That's well, analytical eclecticism is more the idea of drawing. You know what usually happens when it comes to international relations, but also in other disciplines. You pick up one big grand theory and you try to explain everything with that. So the idea of analytical eclecticism is that, yes, realism has a lot of important things to say. It's about power politics after all, and I would be the last to say that realism is not relevant, especially these days, right? So a lot of things to say. So you look at the role of power politics, structural imperatives, how the international system, because of its competition, compels state to behave in a certain way. But then you can also draw from other theories and approaches. So also in my work, but also Professor Scott Pace has done that in his paper in space policy. We had a very interesting exchange of views on that because we were interesting more around the same time on that. Professor Pace was working on US space policy and I was working on China and India in a paper that was published in Astropolitics. And then you can bring domestic considerations. So in my case, I brought structural imperatives related to realism, domestic political considerations, not least because space, especially in the context of China, India, plays an important role. In China, in the context of regime legitimacy, for example, of the Communist Chinese Party. In India, it's also associated with the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. So domestic political considerations are always a key driver of space projects. And then I brought into another third dimension, drawing from constructivism, that was identity and history. How space policy preferences can be mediated by the role of history and identity. We do know, for example, in the context of China and India, that certain high visible space projects are seen as markers of great power status, and the idea of restoring the great civilizations of China and India, and this notion that now we're back, we have arrived as we were in the past. And how do you showcase that? Through high visible space projects such as human space flight, space exploration projects. So it's about prestige then, but it is linked to the role of history and national identity. So that's what I try to do with analytical eclecticism there. I think it has a lot of relevance if you take a look at different cases, maybe Nigeria or South Africa, and see the interplay of these different levels of analysis there. But multiplexity, it's more like a concept that challenges the broader narrative here about global politics.
Okay, we still have a few minutes. Just take one or two more. There's a question around Brexit. So the UK, I think, could be considered as a middle space power. Some may argue that. But we see that there's been especially with the current administration, the Keir Starmer administration, there's a new policy direction is been taken, not just around space, but other aspects of UK relations with the EU. Of course, the UK, they now have access to some of the EU space programs
Yeah.
and other programs. So there's a question from Alexander around, well, let me just read it the way I put it here. What is the Brexit strategy for future space diplomacy?
Well, there are 3 points to highlight here. Obviously, the UK has a very strong space industry. I think we can all agree that Brexit was not a good idea in terms of Britain, UK's participation in space. Well, we shouldn't forget that the UK is still a very important actor in the European Space Agency. So there is a lot of cooperation with European partners as well. But I would expect even more cooperation now with Europe. We're already seeing that in the context of Prime Minister Starmer, but also global partnerships. You already mentioned UK-Africa Space Cooperation. I think we're also going to see a lot more in the context of UK, India, and other Asian space partners. I think there are many, many opportunities there, especially given the vibrancy of African startups and companies. I think there are many, many synergies. And it's something that you can go a bit back to Natasha's point, right? That's another way where African stakeholders can be also more proactive, or not that they're not already, to showcase the important projects that are happening already, the ideas they have, and to create more synergies with the UK space industry.
Okay, then maybe just one last question, which again, we go back to the issue of space power from four asking about characterization. And I think I don't know, maybe a question like this came up earlier around how do you decide on a country is a space power, maybe a great space power, medium space power? What are the like a checklist? What are the things that I know you already mentioned that apart
Yeah.
from whatever maybe on the checklist, other existing powers in quote need to accept you as a power, a space power, but generally, what are the qualities? And maybe if I may link that up with the issue around technological capability, because so it appears sometimes there is those in the science and engineering are in one world of their own, those in the humanities are in another world. But definitely you can't talk about being a space power without demonstrated space capability. So maybe you also want to speak on that also.
Yeah. Well, that's a starting point for sure. The whole discussion begins with capabilities. But here the idea, it's more like, obviously, I'm more interested in the international dimension of what makes a great space power, right? And my issue there is that actually there has been a great deal of debate about what is a space power. And don't get me wrong, even in international relations, as Dr. Ofung knows, we're having these debates about what makes a great power, what makes a superpower, for decades, and there's still not accepted criteria. Now, I can make 2 points there. Obviously, and we have published a few articles, by the way, on space and criteria. You might find those articles interesting there. Obviously, launching capabilities, your own independent launching capabilities, and your own indigenous manufacturing satellite capabilities. Those are the 2 important things. But then again, the key issue is that if you have them as a state, and there are some states that they have them, this doesn't automatically make you a great space power in the eyes of the other great powers. You have to do more things than that. You have to provide public goods. You have to take diplomatic initiatives. You have to provide capacity building opportunities to less powerful states. This is where, power comes from. It's not only about what you have up there, but also what you're doing with other great powers and less powerful actors here. And then the whole idea of what makes a great power is a moving target. The US is definitely the number 1 now. Here the argument is that what counted as a great space power during the Cold War has now changed a lot. It's a very dynamic concept, and it's based on practices in the sense that look what has happened, the commercialization and privatization of space has done for US space power and influence. When Starlink is all over the world, and it provides services, so we can talk about networked space power. The US has also this very important network of allies. It's through NATO as well. Important allies in Asia, Japan. Now look at the cooperation, space cooperation between the United States and India. Very impressive. So it's not only again about material capabilities. It's also about how you engage with your allies, how you take initiatives such as the Artemis Accords, and you try to shape the norms and so on. So again, I would favor complexity and sophistication in order to capture the complex dynamics that shape what is a space power as a moving and dynamic concept. What was a great space power like 30 years ago now has changed because of the commercialization and privatization of space. But it's also changing because now, as I said before, there is definitely the need for more collective action to tackle, for example, shared fate problems such as space debris. And great space powers also have to jump in. Otherwise, there is a question mark about whether, you are a great space power.
Thank you, Dr. Stroikos. I just wanted to give a final remark. So, especially for the participants of what we call the Global Space Policy course, this has been your field for many years because space policy is connected to governance, is connected to space law, is connected to space diplomacy. I don't know, what final thought for it could be career related, it could be action related, whatever, just your final remarks.
Well, what I also say to my students, we need a new generation like you of knowledgeable experts, if you like this word, with a more interdisciplinary perspective. There was 20 years ago, it was just fine. As you said before, the silos. If you had only studied engineering, or if you had studied space law, and that was enough. I think we all have to educate and re-educate ourselves every day, given how important space policy is, but also how dynamic it is. We have to do a bit of engineering, a bit of space history, a bit of international relations, a bit of space law. So it's very dynamic. I think it's fascinating. Maybe we are a bit biased to say that space policy is so interesting, but the other thing here is that now that you have acquired some knowledge is also what you can do with that knowledge. That involves a lot of responsibility, especially given the uncertain times we live in. We have been taking space for granted for many years, but with all these challenges that we're facing today, there is also this very important component of responsibility. And I think that's another key takeaway. And the other thing is that we have to keep re-educating ourselves every day. But it's a fascinating topic. I hope to meet more of you, to see you more involved. We need more people, more experts with your backgrounds involved in space. That's part, of course, of my was part of my lecture today about multiplexity, the agency that you have, but also the responsibility that comes with knowledge and education on this topic. Again, I wish you all the best, and I hope we stay in touch.
Thank you, Dr. Stroikos. And I think one of the ways of being engaged is to write. I mean, there are many platforms to write now. Of course, number one would be the Space Policy Journal. Of course, you go through a rigorous process. It could take, depending on how good your paper is, it could take up to a year or more sometimes. But you're sure that when you put it out, I still remember the paper we wrote about the Space Policy Institute. Initially, you think you've submitted something good, but by the time the editors come in, you really, oh, this is really good. So at the end of the process, you'll be happy with the final product. So there's the Space Policy Journal, there are other platforms. Of course, there are also social media platforms. So we need to engage, we need to share our ideas. Thank you. Maybe just on the
Space policy is open to that, and also LSE Ideas is open to that. So happy to learn about ideas and projects and see how we can move cooperation further.
Sorry, is LSE Idea, is it a journal or is
we publish reports and we also publish comments.
Oh, okay.
So we're also open to that.
Okay. Thank you. I think the last thing I just want to do to invite one of the participants to just quickly respond briefly. Paul Oladuni, if you want to quickly say a short remark. Hello, Paul.
Hello.
Yes, just briefly, you want to make a brief remark.
Yes, it's nice to be here, and I think I'll be talking from the space tourism point of view, and which I believe all African countries should be embraced and encouraged. So it's an opportunity for me to be here and to learn more about different areas of global space policies, and most importantly, how it affects our individual countries. And it's nice to be here, like I said, and I'm very happy to meet with different kinds of people. Some of them are leaders from their own field, and I think it's something that if there's another opportunity, I would love to be involved. And I'm happy that at least this kind of a program is actually coming up from the continent of Africa. So thanks for the opportunity for us to be here and to learn more from different people. And we pray that all these things that we've learned, we make use of it for the advancement and betterment not only of our country and of our different careers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Stroikos, for the talk and for the motivational talk also for the participants also. I think my final remark will be, just like Dr. Stroikos has mentioned, what do we do with the knowledge? So let's try and apply it. And of course, you could also decide to acquire more knowledge too. And for us, I think the next program, which if you're interested in, it's a course on space law and governance, which we run in collaboration with the McGill Institute for Air and Space Law. So you get apart from the knowledge you get from different experts, just like we did the Global Space Policy course from people from around the world. You also get a certificate that is endorsed not only by ASLI, but also by McGill. So that comes up, it starts in October, I think either the second or third week of October. So you can also watch out for when that is going to happen. And then, of course, you can join us there too. So I think we can bring this session to a close. Thanks everyone for staying with us up till now. And then we look forward to more engagements outside now. Have a good rest of the day. Bye for now. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.